We are live. ABJ presents Tornado Tag, episode 154. Abdullah, the Butcher. Myself and BP on the call here tonight. BP, how's your week been, brother?
Busy. As in addition to the real job, I had to go prove once again my trivia mastery at Pilgaroo Brewing on Thursday, and then I had to turn around and have a very hot but very fun night at PPW last night. PPW Sons of the Patriots is in the books, as they say. It was a very, very fun time, wild night, and here we are. I got a sweet new PPW wrestling T-shirt. You can buy these at PPW events. Yeah. So yeah, fun stuff all around. Had a really fun night.
Really fun week. PPW. So any matches that really stand out that people should go check out?
I know a lot of people have said the show stealer last night, and I'm not surprised in the least, was Diego Hill, who is stealing most of the shows he's on these days.
Yeah.
And a guy we have been talking up for a long, long time, Dio Bando. They had a barn burner. CXR and Counter-Strike, Nolan Pierce and Mark Alexander. They had a really, really good one. One of the things that has been so fun to watch firsthand this year in PPW has been the growth and development of Nolan Pierce and Mark Alexander. Nolan Pierce having a great run as the TV champion to the point now where he is willing to put that TV title on the line. We're going to be back August 10th, PPW Conquest, and he is putting his TV title on the line for a shot at Facade in the PPW heavyweight title versus title. Can't wait for that one.
Wow. Yeah. I had a really cool weekend. Got to hang out with Dante
right on
for their birthday weekend. So we went to Out of Bounds in Bloomsburg. So it's like a bowling alley, 2-floor laser tag, giant arcade bar.
Oh, all right.
There's another bowling thing they do there, but it's like smaller pins and also like a smaller ball, almost like I don't know. It's like a different style of bowling. It's pretty wild. We didn't get to try that, but it also there's something else going on there too. Oh, they have interactive darts. We didn't try that, but
interactive darts, like you try to hit each other with the darts. How are they interactive?
I know it. All right, so for straight up, it looks like just a regular ass dartboard in like a special enclosed area, and then there's a computer on it, like I guess that zooms in of where your dart hit. I don't know. It didn't look very impressive. I'd have to see it in action, but the bowling is cool. It was a really state-of-the-art bowling thing. Like all the pins are on wires, so it's easier to re-rack them. And then when you set yourself up in the computer, like you hit bumpers, yes, for you, and then the bumpers like they know it's your turn, and they just go and they go back in for the next person. So you don't have to like go up there and like
the question I ask is, do you have shame? If you say no, they put the bumpers down for you.
Yeah. But it was really fun. It was a cool place. We got to do that, and then today we went to like a little brunch and got to hang out for their birthday. So happy birthday to you, Dante. You probably won't see this because you don't watch wrestling content, but it was a good time. But yeah, so we have a lot of cool stuff going on. I was supposed to do an interview, a movie review on Thursday with Sonny Defarge, but I had some issues on my end with the consuming the movie, so I wasn't able to do so. So we are going to reschedule that one, but we're still on for Scarlet Overkill, which will be tomorrow at 7:00. We will also be at Wrestle Pit this Friday coming up in Philadelphia. So make sure you come hang out with us in Philadelphia if you're in the area. Also, I will be on the Anthony Lanetti podcast on Thursday. Time is still to be determined. I did not get a time yet on that. Actually, as I say that, they're typing in Discord as we speak. And then I will be at New Era Pro Wrestling on Saturday. So come out and hang out with us at New Era Pro Wrestling. I might be getting my gift on Saturday. So I might have a new little hardware to walk around with and show everyone exactly why.
I will be at AXW on Saturday in Orwigsburg. That they're gonna have a fun show. Starting a tournament for their Heritage Championship. They're introducing a new championship and new adventure. I'm going to be doing commentary on my birthday. That's going to be a lot of fun.
There it is. Well, we'll celebrate your birthday Friday night.
There we go. Yeah, we'll be at the Wrestle Pit.
Yeah, and then we'll be back on.
We'll probably be on the road back as it becomes my birthday. To be honest.
Yeah, it's probably very true.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of fun things this week in wrestling. Anything exciting stood out to you? I'm gonna be honest, I haven't really watched any pro wrestling. The only thing I really watch right now is AEW.
I thought this was a very strong Dynamite. I really did think with the Owen Hart finals, with the big angle at the end, this was a pretty strong Dynamite.
Yeah, and this week coming up, Dynamite is looking to be their 250th episode. Will Ospreay versus Okada.
That's right.
MJF versus MJF versus Ospreay, and Okada versus.
Really? Are you sure about that? Because MJF Ospreay seems like where they're going for the Wembley show.
Second,
I'm pretty sure it's Ospreay and Okada. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're gonna have Ospreay and Okada for the Dynamite show, and then I'm pretty sure after that it's going to be, at least it seems like it's going to be MJF and Will Ospreay at the Wembley Stadium show. And that's the big news. A lot of people assume when Hangman Page came back, that was going to be the big kind of turnaround, the big flip, that it's going to be Hangman and Swerve. They've had this big showdown, this big series of matches so far, and that everybody thought that was going to be the move, that the kind of final chapter of this Swerve Hangman feud was going to be happening at Wembley. But no, it looks like it's going to be Swerve and Bryan Danielson at Wembley Stadium and all in London.
I'm actually pulling up now. I believe it's Ospreay versus MJF this Wednesday.
Oh, really?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it's Okada versus somebody really cool. Is it Okada Pac?
That would be very interesting.
No, Pac versus Ospreay is looking like it's going to happen at
Wembley.
All
right, so yeah, that's a battle of different parts of England. I forget where Will's from. Is Will from like Swansea? No, Swansea's in Wales. I don't. I'm gonna just totally get crap.
Mercedes Moné versus Nyla Rose.
So this is Dynamite.
Swerve Strickland versus Okada, champion versus champion.
There we go. Okay,
for the titles. MJF versus Will Ospreay. And I think that's all it's been announced so far. But that's
plenty right there. That's plenty right there.
That's a Wednesday night.
Yeah, it is.
Now, if that, I'm not trying to throw shade, bruv, but if that is announced on a Monday Night Raw, I don't even get excited because it's there's not gonna be no clear definitive finish, and it's gonna be like.
So you think there's gonna be a clear definitive finish in Okada against Swerve?
No, not in that one.
Okay.
But
all right.
AEW also has proven me wrong, where I think they're not gonna do something and they do it.
Yeah, and usually when that happens, they did it and it didn't make sense, unfortunately. Yeah. Like sometimes they should do. Sometimes and you can't do it all the time because yes, you want to make people guess, and you want to kind of surprise people. But sometimes the conventional wisdom is the conventional wisdom because it makes sense. Mm-hmm. Because doing the opposite of the conventional wisdom is stupid. That's how you get Vince Russo. If you want Vince Russo, that's how you get you stop thinking about how do we tell an actual story and you start thinking about how do we surprise people. You'll surprise people if you do things that make no sense. You'll surprise everybody. Like, it'd be very surprising right now if I bladed. If I just ran the razor right now, that would be very shocking and it wouldn't make sense. And I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to cover of this week in wrestling?
I know some of the big controversy this week was around maybe even in the last week, and I'm going to butcher the name here, around Stephanie Vaquer. Is that how you pronounce it?
Valcure.
Are you sure about that? Because it's not spelled that way. Yeah. Why am I going to you to learn how to pronounce a name?
Wrong person. Yeah, good call.
Yeah, I'm not. But she is obviously a very prominent wrestler who has been kind of rocketing the stardom in this program with Mercedes. When I know I made the joke, like, why are they just kind of? She was made in that match with Mercedes, but unfortunately, it's going to be WWE that reaps those benefits.
She's good.
She is signed with them. They've even released. She did her first match yesterday, I believe, in Mexico, and they even did a little backstage thing with her and Damian Priest. So. Some interesting stuff going on. Some very interesting.
They're going to land her and Julia at the same time. That's a big bump to the women's division in WWE.
Yeah, no, WWE is really kind of finding their groove with some things right now. There's some stuff don't
Charlotte's
really like.
Charlotte's going to be returning soon. So like,
well, now we have plenty of people for her to beat.
Yeah, a lot of people to lay down for
She can
Charlotte.
beat Julia. She can beat Stephanie Vaquer. She can beat Roxanne Lopez, Jade Cargill.
Line them up, baby. The goat's back.
She can beat all of them and then take another 8 months off. It'll be wonderful.
Yeah, that's what Charlotte should do. She's that good.
She's pretty good. She's pretty good.
She's amazing.
I'm never gonna the booking can be annoying, but I'm not gonna pretend that Charlotte isn't good.
Yeah, it's hard to deny the fact that she deserves all of that, because when she comes, it's watchable, it's good. Her match quality, she never phones it in, regardless if it's a Monday or a pay-per-view. She's talented. She's really, really good. But yeah, so all that's coming to fruition. I did not get a chance to see, but Marigold put a pay-per-view on this weekend that people are saying was fantastic.
Marigold.
But they said the Marigold pay-per-view was unbelievable.
That was a joke. When everybody says Marigold, because that's how you say it if you speak American or British. Well, yeah. Marigold would probably be like
Marigold, yeah. But they said it was a great show.
Yeah, and I know I always keep an eye on that just because of getting a chance very early in her career to work with Zeta Steel, and now Zeta Steel, I think she's actually moved to Japan.
Yeah,
and she is working over there, and always root for her because she was a pleasure to work with.
Very, very good talent. And they said the EO match was unbelievable.
Yeah, there's another that's another example of WWE kind of shimmying open that forbidden door where they are seemingly much more open to working with other companies than they were when kind of Vince was in charge of everything. Where Joe Hendry was in the main event of NXT this month. I forget the name of the one newer wrestler. She's very tall. She just wrestled somebody on this latest NXT. Izzy Dame? Izzy something?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but she answered an open challenge for Jordan Grace in TNA. Joe Hendry was in the main event of NXT this week. Joe Hendry showed up on the WWE roster page. Io Sky is wrestling for a company in Japan. So it's.
Do you think it's a matter of time before TNA just gets bought out by WWE?
I don't know what's in it for WWE to actually buy it.
That library.
What do you do with a tape library now? You can't sell DVDs anymore. You're not going to sell one extra Peacock subscription. You're getting a flat fee for that Peacock subscription. I mean, if they feel like throwing money away, I guess they could. But I honestly, unless they feel like it's going to make them easier to absorb contracts, I don't know what would be in it for them to buy TNA.
I see them grabbing that because I think with AJ possibly coming to an end, that's a nice tape library to work with. I see them absorbing some. Like if I had the money to absorb a company, I don't know if I would get rid of them though. I would still keep them around and have them do their thing, but help them get a TV deal, and I'd keep them on their platform. But I would definitely set up the like once every couple months, like doing the NXT versus TNA thing, and then having that crossover all the time. But you know what I mean? Because I think TNA's got a really, really, really good roster.
They do, but if you look at their roster deeply, I don't think there's anybody that WWE couldn't have gotten. Like Ace Austin just signed a new deal with TNA. If WWE really wanted them, they probably could have gotten them when that deal was in negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
They clearly want Joe Hendry. They're probably going to get him whether they buy TNA or not. They clearly want Jordan Grace. Her contract's up in October. They're almost definitely going to get her. I would understand the tape library back when you still sold DVDs, especially like they made a fortune off the WCW and ECW tape libraries, or even if you still had your standalone WWE network, where the more subscribers you had, the better off you were because that money was going directly to you. With the way it happens now with Peacock, whether it goes to Netflix or whomever it goes to next, I don't think they get a cent more in that deal because they have TNA's tape library.
Yeah.
Executives for Netflix and Peacock, they don't even know what TNA is.
I just want Ace. I want Masha. I want Jordan. I want Moose, and I want Speedball Mike Bailey, all to have opportunities to wrestle for that big company.
Well, I can't wait to see Speedball Mike Bailey fight a punching bag in a British rounds match.
Yeah.
That's going to be at Pilgrim Brewing on July 25th. They're doing their next Fightertainment, and the only match they've announced so far, British rounds match, that World of Sports style for Fightertainment. It's not wrestling, it's Fightertainment. They're doing Speedball Mike Bailey versus a punching bag.
Punching bag's in trouble.
I don't know. Speedball's had a little bit of a losing streak. Last Fightertainment, he lost 3, maybe 4 times. I don't know if the one officially counts. I don't know.
Ben the Bean.
He did lose to Ben the Bean. Clean as a sheet.
Clean as a sheet.
Yeah.
I remember being at Mania weekend. They're like, Ben the Bean beat Speedball Mike Bailey. I go, what a weekend.
I believe Speedball, and I could be wrong here, I believe he went like 0-14 that weekend.
No, did he beat he beat at Labor of Love. I think he beat Paul London.
Did he?
I think so.
So I thought his whole thing was like he just wanted to do like a bunch of matches and not win a single one. So, but
he might have. Paul London might have won. It was a great match. They
Of
literally
course.
sang "Sweet Cara." He sang American Pie while having Paul London in a figure four, and then the entire crowd started singing it. Yeah, it was a wild show match. It's on WTV as well as Paul London did win. You're right. Like,
yeah,
Lily.
Speedball did not win a single match, I believe, over WrestleMania weekend.
Yeah, Mr. WrestleMania goes 0-14 at WrestleMania weekend. Mr. WrestleMania weekend. Sorry. All right. Well, let's get into today's topic. We probably kept the people going long enough. Today, BP will be covering the history of Abdullah the Butcher. Give us a rundown, a quick synopsis of Abdullah here, and then let's get into it.
Abdullah the Butcher's career is an interesting one. It might be one of the most unique careers in pro wrestling history because this is a guy.
Have you ever met him or seen him wrestle live?
I have met Abdullah the Butcher.
Yes.
I don't know if he wrestled, but I have definitely met Abdullah the Butcher.
I've told the story a few times. I won't go through the whole thing again, but I've watched Abdullah the Butcher versus Terry Funk in Shenandoah Valley High School when I was a kid, and they did a no holds barred steel cage match where they started in the cage and then just wrestled around the entire venue, and they bled buckets. And we never had professional wrestling in a high school gym ever again.
Well, especially considering some things that Abdullah had going on, maybe that's for the best.
Yes.
But I don't know where along the lines that happened. But that whole the bloody thing is a hallmark, is a kind of, it's like if you see a match with The Rock and you don't get the people's elbow, you're like, well, I feel like I got ripped off. If you see a match with if you see a match with LA Knight, he doesn't do the thing, you feel like he got ripped off. If you see a match with Abdullah the Butcher and he doesn't bleed all over the place, you didn't get your money's worth. And that is his hallmark. He is one of the legendary wild brawlers in the history of professional wrestling. And then the other thing is he is a guy who has had a very good career by anybody's estimation, and a really, really solid career. I believe he started wrestling in the 1960s, and his final match was in 2010, and he still makes appearances to this day. GCW put him in the Deathmatch Hall of Fame this year, and he is a guy who never had a run of any real major length, even pre-Rock and Wrestling, pre anything like that, pre-Vincent K. McMahon, pre the Vince McMahon we all know. He never had a prolonged run with the WWF or even the WWF. He did some matches here and there, mainly in the early 70s, but this is a guy who stayed away from the New York territory and had he started in 1958 and he had his last match in 2010, had a 50-plus year career outside of the WWE machine, which is incredibly unique. And he's one of the few people, especially one of the first people as well, who didn't really have that big WWE run, but was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, I believe, in 2009.
Yeah. He had some of the craziest rivalries in sports too. Like, he's a really good antagonist for a lot of people. Like, when you think of some of the greats, you know, they're some of their best, like, you think of Bruiser, you think Bruiser Abdullah matches, you think the Funks, you think, you know, Dusty, you think Sheik, you think Sting, you know, like Harley Race. They had some good rivalries.
Sting not so much.
But he had a feud with him.
He did a little bit when Abdullah came into WCW. Yeah. When you say Bruiser, it's more Bruiser Brody than Dick the Bruiser. Although,
Bruiser Brody. That's
Bruiser Brody. So the thing with Abdullah, and this is something that's kind of a lost art in wrestling now because everything's so national, and even indie promotions. You can, if it's a big enough indie promotion like a GCW or something wild enough happens and it happens to go viral, that you don't really have that territorial system anymore, even in smaller scale wrestling, even in like indie wrestling. Like for instance, if you remember that Luigi Primo guy, who had he had the one clip that went viral. He was everywhere. He was on AEW. He was doing indie dates all over. So even that one little clip at a small show got him a lot of notoriety. Same thing with Ace Austin, jumping off that backboard, springboarded him. Now, he took the ball and ran with it because he's a freakish talent and he's incredibly good at what he does. But something like that is going to really kind of get your name out there. And it kind of takes away from the idea of the attraction. And Abdullah the Butcher was very much an attraction on the same ilk as like an Andre the Giant, on the same ilk as a those are the two big ones. But you had guys like that. If you had somebody coming over from Japan, if you had a guy like a Bugsy McGraw, there were certain guys where they weren't really built to be in a place for too long. And that was most of wrestling actually at that point, where you kind of just did your 6 months in a place, you moved on to the next one because you were kind of wearing out your welcome and getting stale. But Abdullah was a guy, he would come in usually as a heavy against a top baby face. Like usually after the heel in a big feud, the heel would take a loss and I'm going to get you, Dusty Rhodes. You wait until you see what I have in store for you. And it's Abdullah the Butcher. It's this crazy sadist from the Sudan, doesn't speak English. I think some people would even say he can't speak because his tongue was cut out by his own tribe or something like that. But it's Abdullah the Butcher, and he's going to come in and just have these wild, bloody brawls. It's funny because he did have like a martial arts background when he was young. He's not from the Sudan. He grew up in Canada. He started as well. I believe he lives in Georgia now, but yeah, he's originally from Windsor, Ontario, Canada, and he got to start there. He got to start in Montreal. The promoter there was Jack Britton, and his son was a wrestler who wound up going to the WWF for a while, Gino Brito, who I believe he was a tag team partner of Dino Bravo, if I'm not mistaken. And he had some other things, like he had some other names that didn't last too long. And then he very early in his career settled on that Abdullah the Butcher gimmick. And he was managed by pretty much any major manager you can think of. I don't know if he ever was managed by Heenan or Jimmy Hart, but Gary Hart, Paul Jones, the original Brain, Eddie Kretschmann, the Grand Wizard, Oliver Humperdinck. Like usually because he didn't do the talking, a manager would bring him in as his kind of hired gun to settle the score with the big baby face.
Do you think Abdullah was also a big reason for tape trading back in the day? Because like him and Funk Wrestling in All Japan, like really people wanted to see those bloody gore matches because they're two Americans kind of going over there and killing it in Japan, and like those tapes were really sought after.
Not so much that, unless they were doing some things with, I guess, some of the more wild brawls. But I think that was just a sign of the times where it's just like, I want to get my hands on any wrestling I can.
Yeah.
And I think what really kind of amped up tape trading is kind of just deep fandom. And because what really got you knowledgeable about people that weren't local to your territory were the wrestling magazines. And the wrestling magazines, the After mags, not the Napolitano mags, all of these things. They were like, you would hear of like a Jerry Lawler, even if you didn't live near Memphis. Jerry Lawler was in Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Abdullah the Butcher, if he didn't stop by your town, you might see him and his thing too. The guys like Abdullah, like Terry Funk, like a Ric Flair, they were really a big favorite of the wrestling magazines because they bled. And I don't know. I think for a little while, like PWI and the After mags would kind of not really do with the bloody shots, but a lot of your smaller magazines, like your Wrestling Eyes and things like Wrestling World and the non-Western publishing, the more underground wrestling magazines, they loved just getting a picture of a guy bleeding like a stuck pig. That Tony Storm angle we were talking about at the end of Dynamite, that's a throwback. That's that pose where they're just kind of standing like splayed out with the bloody face. That would have been on the cover of a wrestling magazine in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And even in the 1970s.
So that was a crazy blade job.
Yeah, that whole segment was done really well. It was done really, really well. And so Abdullah, I don't know, but again, to answer your question about tape trading, yeah, for people who really like the wild brawls and things like that, and maybe they were doing some things in Japan that they didn't do here, or if you didn't get that kind of wrestling in your area, your wrestling was more scientific. But like in Detroit. Like a lot of Abdullah's stuff in the United States, it was really big, was in Detroit. It was a place where he wrestled early because it's right over the border from Canada. Detroit and Toronto are fairly close together, or Montreal are pretty close, I believe. And Abdullah would have wars with Bobo Brazil, and that was the Sheik's territory, so it was a heavy brawling territory. He wrestled a lot in Calgary. He really was a globetrotter. He wrestled all over the world. He was huge in Japan.
He put the miles in. I'm not crying. I'm when as I get older, my days get tired and I start yawning around this time. But I'm good. I'm not that emotional of Abdul the Butcher.
To this day, like there are still people who really kind of do big homages in Japan to Abdul the Butcher. There's a character, I think he was called Abdul the Criminal. Now I just might be called Abdullah in One Piece, which is like a huge manga and anime in Japan. He's based on Abdul the Butcher. There was a character in a popular anime, Fist of the North Star, that was based on Abdul the Butcher. There's the wrestler still wrestles, Abdullah Kobayashi, who does a butcher thing. I forget who it was, but there was a MMA fighter back in the Pride days who called himself Diet Butcher. It was even on his like Vale Tudo shorts. That's an homage to Abdullah. Like
that's not the guy that got his teeth kicked out in UFC 1, was it?
No, I don't believe so. That
guy, that was like the sumo guy. That was like the very first UFC fight where he goes in for a takedown, trips, falls, and the guy just kicks him straight in the mouth.
Oh no, I think that was Emmanuel Yarbo. He wasn't even Japanese.
Yeah. Wow.
But Abdullah had that. He was kind of built for the territory because he could come in, have a run where he was dominant for like 3 or 4 months. But he was one of those guys like an Andre the Giant where you just couldn't keep him around for too long. He was a special attraction. That's how women's wrestling used to be. The women would go around the country, be like, it was a special thing. There's a ladies match tonight. And like, oh, that's different. And then they would do that for 1 or 2 weeks, and then they would just move on to the next town. And Abdullah would just kind of have his run, move on to the next town. There were only a few places, Calgary, Stampede, where he would really have a more prolonged run. But the thing with him was the whole thing was like he was this crazy, psychotic monster, this giant of a man who would gouge at you with forks and make you bleed, and he didn't care if he bled either. And a character like that, you have to be careful. I know, right? We'll get there at the end. A character like that, you have to be careful because once they lose, what you do with them next is very tricky. You have to, after you prove that they are mortal, the next step is very, very, very tough. And that's what happened with Goldberg. What do you do after Goldberg loses? What do you do after Ryback loses? It's something you have to be very cognizant of, or you have to have a very, not that Abdullah wasn't talented, but Abdullah was kind of one-dimensional. He just kind of rode with what worked. And back then was like, well, what do? I just go to the next town. Yep. And I'll be back here in like 5 years, and they'll kind of have forgotten that I lost that match.
This is why wrestlers should be able to bounce from company to company and actually be independent contractors. I think it would help a lot more of their brands.
But it wouldn't. It's just the whole landscape has changed because everybody can see everything. Yep. If you do something notable, it's going to be all over Twitter. It's going to be over social media. It's going to be jumping from WWE, AEW isn't the same. Everybody can watch both of them. Back in the day, like you had to, unless you had like a big syndicated network or like pre-cable television, WTBS and USA Network, you didn't really have a chance to see people who weren't in your area. That's why that was the appeal of wrestling magazines. You could read about what was happening in all these other places that you had no access to. And that is what really started tape trading. Yeah. Tape trading came from, I don't have access to this. Like, it's funny. One of the people who really kind of made tape trading a big thing and a very fascinating figure in the history of professional wrestling is Playboy Buddy Rose, who was a big star in the Portland territory. He was the executioner at WrestleMania 1. We were talking about him a few months ago when we covered WrestleMania 1. And he had a run in WWF later, doing a whole like the blowaway gimmick where he would say he lost weight by putting this powder on himself and sitting in front of a fan. But Buddy Rose was one of the first people in the United States to actually have a VCR that could record off of the TV. And he would record any wrestling show he could. And there's a lot of Portland wrestling tapes that exist today exist because Buddy Rose recorded them. A lot of early Memphis wrestling that exists today exists because Jim Cornette and Kenny Bolin recorded Memphis wrestling when it came on in Kentucky. And they would, Cornette was always talking about this. They had a big, like, I think Cornette's parents had like a big antenna. This is like pre-satellite TV. They had a big antenna on the top of their things. This is like in the 70s. And they knew if we move and they lived in Kentucky. It's like, if we move the antenna this way, we can get Memphis. If we do it this way, we can get Dick the Bruiser's wrestling from Chicago. If we move it this way, they knew exactly where to position that antenna to get wrestling. And
someone on the window, to the left.
Like, no, and it wasn't the same way like when I was growing up, but I knew how to find wrestling. Like, I couldn't find anything else. I didn't know how to tie my shoes. I knew how to find wrestling when I was like, little. I would just flip through we went to Disney World when I was 4 years old. I found wrestling on the TV. I did. I found wrestling. And, I don't know what would have happened if we would have had like WWE Network.
Not to get weird or sentimental, but like, if your parents were still around, like, what do you think they would think of the fact that you now are like doing what you do in wrestling?
My dad was a wrestling fan, so he would probably be really. My mom would have supported. My mom supported anything, but
knowing how much you loved it, you think she'd probably be like, holy shit, he fucking did it.
Oh yeah, probably,
yeah, for sure. That's awesome.
But no, like, it's it's one of those things where you just kind of you found it, and that's how the legend of Abdullah grew, because you would see him for a little bit and be like, this guy's a kind of tough, but that Abdullah was crazy.
Yeah.
And he touched so many places, even if it was for a little bit. But that globetrotting thing really meant that, compared to some other people who have had that kind of a storied career, who had that much of a run as like a big time guy, he didn't really have, if you look at his like title history, it's not as impressive as some other people. Like, he was one of the people that helped build All Japan. When Giant Baba was just getting it off the ground, he won the Champion Carnival there a few times. He won like a few different titles there before the Triple Crown became a Triple Crown. But like, he was a Georgia heavyweight champion a few times. Once he was the United States champion, which was the big Detroit title. He had that title once, but they were usually short reigns. It was like, oh, the Butcher beat him, but the babyface is going to get it back.
Mm-hmm.
The babyface is going to get it back because he wasn't like the heel you built around. He wasn't the heel that somebody chased. He wasn't Ric Flair. He wasn't Harley Race. He was more of a Bruiser Brody. He was more of a, this is the guy, this is the monster they bring in to face off against the hero, which is amazing. It's amazing that he didn't have a run with Hogan, because the basic formula of a Hulk Hogan opponent, especially in that first run, is they're really just leaning on the house show business, because before it becomes more pay-per-view driven. Yeah, if not so much like the people who would have the long runs with Hogan, like a Piper or a Savage or even a Paul Orndorff, but most of the people who would do like a 3-month run at house shows with Hogan were like Big John Studd, Kamala. Kamala is somebody that has a very similar gimmick. It's it's leaning into a stereotype of the, it's a dated stereotype now. We talked about Body Slam last week, but it's the dated stereotype of the quote unquote African savage.
Mm-hmm.
And Hogan did have a run with Kamala, but like a Killer Khan, all these people would have these really quick, the Missing Link. All these people would have like these really quick runs, these monster of the weeks that were thrown at Hogan. Abdul the Butcher would have been perfect with that, and probably would have drawn a lot of money.
But Hogan probably thought, for like his image, that the dude bleeding and bringing a fork is not something Hogan wouldn't work with.
It's not only something that Hogan didn't want to do, it's something that Vince McMahon wouldn't have wanted to do.
Yeah.
The blood was so few and far between. The one angle I can think of where they did a lot of blood and they did everything they could to censor it was when Ron Bass attacked Brutus Beefcake. Because if you go back to SummerSlam 1988, Brutus Beefcake was supposed to wrestle the Honky Tonk Man for their Continental title, and Ron Bass had spurs. He was a cowboy. He was an outlaw, and he ran his spurs across Brutus Beefcake's head, and then they would just put a big censored thing over the video. You could see like a little bit of Brutus bleeding between it, but it was more like what you didn't see, and it made it seem worse than it really was. And then what happened was Beefcake had to bow out of SummerSlam, and here comes the Ultimate Warrior as a mystery opponent and beats Honky in 30 seconds. But yeah, the bloodiness of it, that would have had to been toned down, and maybe Abdullah didn't want to tone it down, and that could have been a big thing. Plus, he was always in demand, and he didn't mind traveling. He would go to Europe. He would go to Australia when Australia had wrestling. He would Japan. He always had a place in Japan, and that kind of gave him options that other people didn't really have. And he wrestled in Puerto Rico a lot. He had bloodbaths with Carlos Colon.
Colon, yeah.
That style, the wild brawls, out of control.
Well, he's also in the locker room the night Colon and Brody go into the shower.
It wasn't. That was Colon was there, but it was not. That was Jose Gonzalez and Vader one that.
Yeah, but I mean, Colon. Isn't the rumor that Colon possibly sent the guy in the shower?
I don't know if I would go that far.
Okay.
A lot of people look the other way. I didn't know. It escaped me that Abdullah had been there. I knew Tony Atlas was there. That's one you always hear about.
Well, Tony Atlas is the one on the dark side who openly spoke about it. It was like, that's bullshit. They fucking did it. And Abdul's like, I know what to tell you. I'm not saying a word. Like,
Abdullah is a guy. He has done like a handful of shoot interviews. He is a guy that he's very close to the vest. He is very much a worker. And not if even though it says a shoot interview, there's a lot of guys working in those shoot interviews, and they're telling you half truths. They're telling you what they and Abdullah's a guy where it's always like, well, yeah, I'm gonna need a little extra if you want me to talk about that.
Yeah,
but yeah, so Abdullah's doing a lot in the '80s in Japan. He's doing a lot. He did have a world class run in the mid '80s. He was constantly in Puerto Rico. He did have a big and constantly in Japan, an icon in Japan, especially as we bridge into that death match. He had a few matches in early ECW, but his ECW appearances were relatively few and far between. But early on, like especially before Paul Heyman really had a foothold and Eddie Gilbert was doing a lot more of the booking, one of the legendary matches that I might have the teams a little off here, but I believe it was Abdullah and I'm gonna get the teams wrong here, but I know the four people involved in the match were Abdullah, Kevin Sullivan, Terry Funk, and Stan Hansen. And it was just a wild bloodbath, double DQ. And I remember this was something that was in the wrestling magazines at this point, because ECW, like I watched it on TV because it was local, it was in Philly. But somebody, like, there was such a wild brawl, and this reporter from PWI was covering it. I want to say it was Abdullah and Hansen against Terry Funk and Kevin Sullivan, but I'm not 100% on that. But they say that like this fan took their ticket stub and dipped it in a pool of blood that was just laying on the floor of the ECW arena, and that was their souvenir. Just might want to be careful about that souvenir.
Yeah,
We'll talk about that.
You wear gloves.
But the big run that Abdullah had with a national company did come in the early '90s, around this time, maybe a little before this. So Sting is feuding with kind of feuding with Cactus Jack. This is around like 92, 93. Actually, no, this is earlier than this. This is like 91. Sting is feuding with Cactus Jack, and Cactus Jack gets Sting a birthday present, and it's a giant box. And this is an old Jim Cornetteism, and Jim Cornette's not in WCW at this point, so he didn't, this wasn't on him. But this is something that they would do in Memphis a lot. This is an old territory trick. You get a big box. And Jim Cornette talked about this when he talked about Chainsaw Charlie. When Terry Funk, they did the same thing and it was with Cactus Jack, where there's a big box, because Cactus Jack was feuding with the New Age Outlaws. There's a big box on the stage on Raw. And then like the New Age Outlaws are beating up Cactus Jack, and you just hear a chainsaw running. And then Terry Funk chainsaws through the box. And Jim Cornette said, yeah, the rule is, why did they make him sound like Jimmy Hart? The rule is, if they come out of the box, they get over. They just get over. The guy that comes out of the box gets over.
Did not work in AEW with Leatherface, right? Didn't Leatherface come out of the box?
No, he just came out I think he just came out through the thing. That was a product placement thing. Chainsaw Charlie didn't get that over either. But yeah, Abdullah was in the box, and Abdullah and Sting were kind of fighting. Abdullah and Sting were fighting back and forth. So this was just like this. Abdullah and Cactus Jack were like this tag team that would fight each other too, because they were crazy, and They would have all these back and forths. And the most famous thing Abdullah does in this WCW run was at Halloween Havoc 1991. What a thing this would be to cover. This match is goofy. This match is silly. Halloween Havoc 91 is a show that's kind of interesting just because WCW is kind of in transition here. This is did Gavin come out of a box? I think he was
Chainsaw Charlie.
Okay.
Yeah, he did they recreated that bit where Gavin came out as Chainsaw Charlie. Yeah.
He got a chance to hold the sparklers for Gilbert's entrance last night. That was fun.
Did he?
Yeah.
Who did he dress up as?
John Cena.
Okay. Yeah, it's that time. About that time.
It was hot in there.
Yeah.
I don't think the muscle suit needs to go away until like October.
Yeah.
It's a little hot in there.
Real quick, just to kind of go off track a little bit. Cena announced a retirement tour.
Yes,
it's not gonna be like a year thing. It might be a 2-year thing.
All he has said so far is that he is this is going to be his last Royal Rumble. It's going to be his last WrestleMania in April in Vegas. WrestleMania on April 20th. That's going to be interesting. And it's also Easter. It's also Easter Sunday. But nothing 100% is like they haven't said like this is going to be his last match date. Just that it's his final Royal Rumble, his final WrestleMania. I think he's talked about doing upwards of 30 to 40 matches, and then he's done. And he's retired. And the big news is he's retiring the jorts. He says if he ever comes back to do something, like he's not going to wrestle, but if he ever comes back for an appearance, he's going to be wearing a suit.
Gotcha. So who are some matches you want to see John Cena get done before he calls it up? Or rematches?
His last match feels like it almost has to be against Randy Orton, right? It almost has to be.
Or R-Truth.
His boyhood. The funny thing about that is they almost got into a fight before R-Truth was in WWE. They almost got in a fight in an airport once.
Really?
No, he would have to team. Well, he already has teamed with his boyhood hero. They already have teamed up because they
had to fight.
They fought before. It was a main event of a pay-per-view. I mean, they could. It does feel like to me though that his final. You would have to say like who's Cena's greatest opponent ever. It's probably either Edge or Randy Orton, and they can't do Edge, so it feels like that last match almost has to be against Randy Orton, unless he just wants to pass the torch to somebody. If he wants to pass the torch to a Cody Rhodes or somebody and just do the favors on the way out. I would love to see him with Punk again. Like maybe John Cena's best match ever is that Money in the Bank match against Punk. I would love to see
him. And AJ was really fucking good too.
Yeah, he had a few great matches with AJ. He had a few great matches with Kevin Owens. They would be great. Any of those.
The history of John Cena.
That's a long history.
Yeah, that might be a 2-parter.
Hey, I think you can fit it in one. So the WCW run, going back to that, this Chamber of Horrors match. It's a 4 versus 4. Have you ever seen this match?
Yes.
It's a 4 versus 4.
It's a fucking nightmare.
And it's a complete mess. It's a cage that it's pre Hell in a Cell, but it goes around the ring so you can fight. It kind of hugs the guardrails, a little bit, so you can fight you can fight outside the ring a bit. And there's like people dressed up as ghouls, and there's people in caskets that attack the Steiner brothers. And then the chair of torture comes down from the ceiling and comes down into the ring. And a team wins by putting one of their opponents in the chair of torture and throwing the switch. Except to turn the switch on, you have to pull it down, and it keeps just falling down. So people are put in the chair and they put the thing on, and they're supposed to go, oh, you have to throw the switch, but it's already down. It fell down.
Yeah.
To the point where
Cactus Jack is most of his work in the match is fixing the switch.
Yeah, he's holding it up because the finish is supposed to be Abdullah's putting, I believe it was Rick Steiner in there, but it might have been Scott. But at the very end, the Steiner brother does a belly-to-belly, deposits Abdullah in the chair, puts the thing on, and then Mick throws the switch. But poor Mick is sitting, or Cactus is up there, like, just waiting for, like, 3 minutes and looking back, like, is it time to do it? So the whole finish is bungled.
Commentary just gives up halfway through.
And then, basically, Abdullah just has to flop around like a dead fish in this chair, acting like he's being electrocuted. Yeah. While pyro is going off and setting the ring on fire.
Yes. Didn't wasn't like one of the bags catch on fire too?
That was a different Halloween Havoc.
Gotcha. That's when Muda put the fire out with spray.
That was the first Halloween Havoc. That was actually in Philadelphia. That was at the Philadelphia Civic Center. And the main event, it was...
we got to cover at least a couple Halloween Havocs this year.
Yeah, no, the first one would be interesting. The first one would be interesting. There's a pretty good... I think it's the Samoans and the Steiners have a good match, or somebody else in the Steiners.
I have the Rey Mysterio Halloween Havoc mask with him and Eddie.
Oh, that's an all-time great Halloween Havoc match.
Yeah,
like 2 of the first 3 Halloween Havocs were in Philly. They did one in Philly, then they did one in Chicago. Or 2 of the first 4, because they did one in Philly, Chicago. I think the one we're talking about is in Fort Lauderdale or somewhere down in Florida. And then they did the one after that in Philly, which was the first spin the wheel, make the deal match with Sting and Jake the Snake. But yeah, what you're talking about is the main event. Ric Flair was a babyface at that point. And it's Ric Flair and Sting with Ole Anderson in their corner against Terry Funk and the Great Muta. And they have this guy called the Dragon Master in their corner, who was the Japanese Kendo Nagasaki, not the British Kendo Nagasaki. And believe it or not, the British Kendo Nagasaki is the more famous one. And I think it may have been the same cage, because I think you could, if I'm not mistaken, it's a little fuzzy. I haven't watched that match in about 2-3 years. But I think because he had managers in there who would, like, Ole had to throw in the towel for his team, Gary Hart had to throw in the towel for his team, and the referee was Bruno Sammartino because he hated Vince at that point. But yeah, they had all this stuff on the cage, like ropes that people could swing from, and sandbags and stuff like this, and like thatch and all that. And the pyro on the cage started the fire, and yeah, Muta tried to put the fire out with his mist.
Yeah.
But what happened with this one is, yeah, like Abdullah's like writhing in the chair, and like the pyro sets the mat on fire and somebody stomps it out. These guys come in with a stretcher, but they look like they're ghouls. They're like in all white. They have white face paint, and they're trying to pull Abdullah out. They're trying to carry him out, and he just starts beating on them and beating up all the ghouls. And
he just electrocuted to death.
Yeah, he was electrocuted, but he was... I think they actually used this to turn Abdullah babyface, if I'm not mistaken, because I think he had the feud with Cactus Jack after that, and Cactus was the bad guy, Abdullah was the good guy.
Yeah.
And it's one of the rare times you'll see a babyface Abdullah the Butcher. He and then he did a lot of indie stuff in the mid 90s. He did a lot of stuff in like Puerto Rico. He was in Heroes of Wrestling. If you want to watch probably the worst major wrestling show, the worst mass-produced wrestling show ever, it is Heroes of Wrestling. And here, because our next show is going to be about a very bad wrestling show. A very bad wrestling show. Am I right? Their next show is King of the Ring 95.
Yeah. Next one is King of the Ring 95. Yeah.
That is a very bad show.
Yeah.
It is an awful pay-per-view. Legends of Wrestling, or Heroes of Wrestling, makes King of the Ring 1995 look like WrestleMania 17. It makes...
Is this the one in 99?
Like, what? Yeah. Heroes of Wrestling was in 99. Yeah. It's the one where Jake the Snake Roberts shows up completely obliterated. Obliterated to the point where he couldn't even have a match. It was supposed to be like him against Jim the Anvil Neidhart, and then King Kong Bundy against Yokozuna. But they wind up turning into like Bundy and Neidhart against Yokozuna and Jake, because Jake is really drunk and Yoko was like really immobile at that point because he was probably close to like 700 pounds. And he could still move a little bit, but it was getting kind of rough for him. So they just made it a tag match. There is a match a lot of people consider one of the worst wrestling matches of all time on that show. That is the Men Down Under, which is the Bushwhackers against the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. It's not a good show. It's not a good show.
The best match on the card got a half a star.
Is that Too Cold and Julio?
No, that got a quarter of a star.
Really? Like, those are the two guys that are actually good too.
Samu and the Samoa Savage, which was Tonga Kid.
Yeah, we just saw him. Yes, Tonga Tom. Yeah,
took on Marty Jannetty and Tommy Rogers, and they got a half star.
The Fantastic Rockers.
Greg Valentine took on Georgie Animal Steel for a -3 star. Too Cold Scorpio took on Julio Francisco for a 1 1/4 star.
Yeah,
so
that's
the best.
match.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Too Cold Scorpio looks like he might be getting back in the ring with somebody we're cool with, maybe teaming up.
Isn't he didn't he just get arrested for like stabbing somebody or shooting somebody?
He just was down in Philly, and Too Cold and Too Smooth might be taking bookings.
All right, don't hate that.
Yeah. Then we have the Bushwhackers versus Nikolai Volkov, Iron Sheik. That got a -5 star.
The elusive. I had to do my best Brian Alvarez impression here. -5 stars.
Yes. Tully Blanchard versus Stan Lane got a DUD. I don't even know what DUD means.
It's a dud. It just means it's a dud.
Yeah, it didn't even get like a review. Yeah. Abdullah the Butcher versus I won't bury the lead in case if you want to talk about it, but this match got a -2.25 star. Snuka versus Bob Orton got a -0.5 star, or -1 star, and then Jim and King versus Jake and Yokozuna got a -3.
Yeah, so it's Abdullah and One Man Gang is his opponent, the former Akeem.
Do we watch this and review it?
You're a glutton for punishment, aren't you? Like I've seen it before. I watched the pay-per-view as it happened. It was it is bad. It is there's so bad it's good. This is just bad.
Not worth your time.
I'll do it. I'll do it.
What do we think, chat? Let us know in the chat. Should we review this show and watch it with all of you? Heroes of Wrestling is essentially what it's called. 2,300 people watch this show.
Oh, at the actual show.
Yeah.
It's old wrestlers that just unfortunately can't really do it anymore.
Yeah.
So he did that, and then he did have I remember he showed up at Ring of Honor once. It was called Night of the Butcher. Did we cover that show before? It sounds very familiar.
We did not. No.
Okay, but yeah, there was a Ring of
Honor.
We
could probably bring the guy on who booked it though.
I think he was a little more behind the scenes at that point. That was early on in. He wasn't the booker unless you got connections with Gabe. Gabe Sapolsky would have been the booker at that point.
Maybe.
You know Gabe? All right, sure. He did do
people who know people.
I feel like we did cover Night of the Butcher because Carnage Crew was in that. HC Loke and Tony DeVito.
We did not cover it. We might have talked about it on a thing, but we didn't cover the whole show.
Okay. And he has gone back and forth to Puerto Rico a while. He did a lot of his final matches in 2009, 2010 were in Japan. There was a company, and I would love to do an episode on Hustle. Hustle was a kind of offshoot of K1. And it was run by Nobuhiko Takada. And it was a how do you describe Hustle? It was, what did they call it? It's something kind of an opera. It was, I forget what they call it. It was like theater wrestling. And it was a fighting opera. That's what they called it. Just it was just completely over the top, completely very silly, but they had Mirko Krokop in there. They had Hustle is its own thing. It's something that it's hard to explain. I know they had a thing where there was I don't even remember her name now, but they had a woman who was one of the people that was in there a lot, and I kind of want to do it just to make everybody else watch it.
We're making y'all watch King of the Ring 95.
Yeah, well, let's see how we react to King of the Ring 95, because
it's worse than that.
On a scale of 1 to 10, King of the Ring 95, and I'm not going to say anything funny here. King of the Ring 95 is a 3 or 3.5, and Legends of Wrestling is a flat out 1.
You give King of the Ring 95 a 3.
I might be being generous.
3 is not a terrible. Out of 5, 3 is not a bad.
No,
score.
out of 10. Oh,
out of 10. Okay.
Maybe if I can go half points, King of the Ring 95 is probably a 2.5 out of 10.
2.5 out of 10.
And Heroes of Wrestling is a 0 out of. It's as low. It's the lowest possible score.
Yikes!
But I think now I'm trying to think about it. I think the person I'm thinking about. No, Mal Chan was in. Mal Chan was in Bullet Club. But whoever this, I forget the name of the woman that was in Hustle. She laid an egg. And then the Great Muda blew mist on it, and then the egg hatched, and it was the sumo wrestler Aki Bono, but it was called like Bono-chan or Bono-chan.
I'm looking at Wikipedia real quick. Do you know what all Abdul's build names have been?
I saw some of them. He's been Abdullah the Butcher for most of his career.
Yes, I want this name as a wrestler. Pussycat Pickens.
There you go.
Pussycat Pickens. That's it.
So then Abdullah also, and it pains me that it's closed now, so you can't do it. I've heard it wasn't that great anyway. But Abdullah for a while had a restaurant that sounds right up my alley. He had a restaurant called Abdullah the Butcher's House of Ribs and Chinese Food.
Yeah.
Which is it was, and I know they had like a big velvet painting of him in there, like him holding a cigar. He always has a cigar. Like even when I met him in 1999, he had the big cigar. He has giant scars in his forehead from blading all the time. And Mick Foley talked about this. He would like to like kind of mess with people and just like throw people off. He would put quarters and like poker chips and things like that in his forehead because his scars ran so deep that you could just stick stuff in there.
Yeah, you could put like your fingers in them.
Yeah. And so let's kind of talk about what we were alluding to for a while. There is a wrestler from Canada who is no stranger to controversy himself.
Teddy
Devin
Hart?
Nick.
Oh,
That's one of them. But not who I was talking about. I'm talking about Devin Nicholson, who most people nowadays would know as Hannibal. He has a fairly popular YouTube channel. I don't know how frequently updated it is now, called Hannibal TV. He's done a lot of like shooting interviews with people. He's had a lot of like famous wrestlers on, and he wrestled in a match with Abdullah the Butcher and a bloodbath, just like any other thing. I think he might have been wrestling as Kid Nichols at that point, but he had a match with Abdullah the Butcher in 2007 where they both bled during the match, which was not uncommon for an Abdullah the Butcher match to have the old double juice, as they say, where both wrestlers bleed. So 2 years go by, and according to Hannibal, according to Devin Nicholson, he says that he had a few tryouts with WWE, and they offered him a 3-year developmental contract in 2009. And he goes to get his medicals, and they say, we can't offer you this contract because you have hepatitis C. And he sued WWE because I guess he alleged discrimination because of a medical issue. And then he also comes to find out that Abdullah the Butcher had hepatitis C when they had their match, and they were both bleeding. And he believes that's where he had gotten it, because he had wrestled Abdullah a few times. And Abdullah's go-to move, this is legendary, is he would stab people with a fork. He would take a fork out of his pants and just stab his opponent with a fork. And a lot of times he stabbed them with a fork and really opened them up, and he would be bleeding too. And it was very common. More often than not, everybody bled in an Abdullah match. That's just the way it worked.
Wasn't Abdullah big on a lot of people would say he would reuse the same blade. Like he would just kind of like
that. I don't know.
Throw the blade back in his bag and use the same blade again. That a lot of people were upset with that. And then he would do this thing where he would kind of tape his fingers and have the blade in there, and he would just kind of like.
Oh, that I'm sure he did. That's just an old trick. The razor between the fingers. Like a lot of times back in the day, especially if you weren't comfortable with bleeding, your opponent would blade you. Like people, like if you were younger and you weren't experienced enough to do it, like your opponent would cut you a lot.
Yeah.
And it was also like easier for a lot of times the referee would hide the blade. Old wrestling trunks had blade pockets inside the trunks. So it was a little pocket you could hide your razor blade in. But yeah, usually if a lot of guys had heavily taped fingers, they were usually hiding a blade. The scariest thing is people would hide blades in their wrist tape. I'm guessing they would do it on the outside of the wrist tape, but you would just undo the tape a little bit and pull the blade out.
Yeah.
because you
that's kind of what they would in the wrestler, where he took the blade and he kind of broke it, and then he put it in he taped his wrist, made a little pocket, hit it in there, taped it up, and then they'd pull it out, use it, and hand it off the referee.
That's how they do it. Sometimes the referee would pass through the blade. There's a million ways to do it. There's a million ways to
hide it under the ring.
I mean, you can usually see it if you're watching it, unless because nobody knows how to do the camera cuts anymore. But
especially AEW in the beginning, they'd zoom in on someone blading. Zoom in and they're like,
it's kind of a lost art, like because I mean WWE does blood sometimes now, like Cody has bled a few times. But so what happens here is that Devin Nicholson alleged he sued Abdullah the Butcher for $6.5 million Canadian, saying that he lost his opportunity with WWE because Abdullah knowingly wrestled with hepatitis C and gave him the illness.
Yeah.
And he also said he didn't consent to being cut, and he alleged this ended his wrestling career. And Abdullah lost the lawsuit. I think the judgment was over $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Devin Nicholson has had his share of controversy as well. A few years ago, I guess he stabbed a referee with a spike, but he said it was a planned spot, but everybody that was involved said it wasn't. And that was a huge controversy. I remember that as it happened. But so Abdullah loses the judgment, and I mean, I don't know how the restitution is gone, but that was a huge controversy. And at that point, by the time this is happening, Abdullah's already kind of out of in-ring competition.
I don't think Abdullah's paid him a dime either. I think so. Abdullah also polyamorous and has multiple wives, but he claims bankruptcy. But I don't think he's technically married. He just says they're his wives.
Okay.
But he funnels all of his money through his girlfriends, and then he has nothing to his name, so he doesn't have to pay anything because he's legally broke.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, that was kind of talked a little bit in Dark Side of the Ring.
That was I don't think I ever saw that episode. That is a trick that Hulk Hogan used when he got divorced. He set up this trust or like this corporation that all of his money was funneled through, and Eric Bischoff handled it for him. And that's how he got a lot of stuff. He got through a lot of stuff. But another thing that happened around the late 2000s, 2009, I believe, is when Abdullah goes into the WWE Hall of Fame. And there was some controversy there. I know, like, Superstar Billy Graham, or 2011, Superstar Billy Graham asked to be taken out of the Hall of Fame because he said Abdullah was a garbage wrestler, essentially. He didn't belong in there. It wasn't real wrestling what he did. Because like that style, Abdullah never really did a technical style. Every match was kind of the same. It was a wild brawl, fighting all over the building, blood, weapons, and a lot of people that are more purists resent that style. So it wasn't always something that people really took to all the time. And like you never hear about Abdullah the Butcher having a run in the AWA. Vern Gagne did not like that style of wrestling.
Yeah.
That may be why he never really had a big WWF run. Not that Vince Sr. was a huge fan of like purely technical wrestling, but he didn't like a lot of that over the top violence.
Yeah.
He didn't, even before Vince Jr. gets in there, even before Vince the McMahon gets in there. It's not so much that it's family oriented, but it's more about storytelling. It's more about kind of very basic wrestling. So it was really like the territories that didn't really mind a lot of bloodbaths that would be where Abdullah gravitated, even to like working with Insane Clown Posse over the years at the end of his career. A lot of your Big Japan, which is one of your more deathmatch oriented companies in Japan. That's where he really gravitated toward, especially toward the end when he was getting more limited physically. The one thing we didn't talk about is Abdullah's a very big man, He was always building, I believe, like 400 pounds, and he looked every bit of it. Like a lot of times, like I don't know about that, but no, Abdullah the Butcher is a big guy. Abdullah the Butcher is an inspiration to big guys.
Yeah,
look, the fact that guy lived to be 83 makes me feel good. It makes me, and he has hepatitis C. And
our buddy Chuck just recently met Abdullah and got to help him out a little bit, and also has made Abdullah the Butcher little figures. So if you want to support our buddy Horror Prince, look up Horror Prince, and go check him out. He sells Abdul little figures.
Yeah, and he did check us something with the Deathmatch Hall of Fame.
Yep.
Another buddy of ours, Gary from Smart Mark Video, was part of the same class.
Yeah,
well deserved. So,
yes.
and see that is with that style of wrestling now, kind of, it's always going to be something that a lot of people look down on. And it's not my flavor of wrestling, but I don't look down on it. Like if you like it, you like it. Everybody that's involved with it knows the risks, and they make it. They have a good way of making it look more dangerous than it seems. Not to say it's not dangerous at all, but he is really an icon of that, because a lot of that stuff happened in Japan. It's FMW, Big Japan, places like that, and Abdullah was right there. And a lot of the inspiration for that came from Abdullah having these wild brawls in all Japan, and without him, that hardcore style doesn't get formed the way it did. So that's definitely something that you can really hang on Abdullah. But I think the real interesting thing, the real fascinating thing for him is that he is such a unique character and never had that big run. Like even his WCW run was only like a year.
Yeah,
he was a true. You want to talk about independent contractors? Abdul the Butcher. The only guy that was kind of a lot like that was Bruiser Brody. But Bruiser Brody, unfortunately, his career was cut very short because
what about Funk?
Terry Funk, yeah, but Terry Funk was the NWO World Champion. Abdul the Butcher was never going to get near the NWO World title.
But Funk was a trailblazer. Like he lived his life on the road. Like he,
they all lived their life on the road.
Yeah, Flair was another one who would just travel with a championship and go to place to place to place.
Well, that's just what the NWA champion did at that point.
Yeah,
but what I'm talking about is kind of a man without a country. Like Terry Funk, like when he was coming up, Amarillo, like his dad owned the territory. You don't get more entrenched than that. He had a family territory just like the Von Erichs did. Ric Flair, he doesn't have that. He bought into a few territories like every now and then, but Ric Flair was very, very, very linked to Jim Crockett. Dusty Rhodes, he starts being very, very linked to Eddie Graham, and then he goes up to Crockett and gets the book there, and he's very, very linked to Crockett. A lot of your top stars, Harley Race had a piece of the Kansas City office. Most of your guys, most of your top stars, and even people a little below that, had their home area. Abdul the Butcher was truly a vagabond. Like he gets his start in Montreal. He has a long run in Calgary. He has a good run in Detroit. He's in Florida for a while. He's in Georgia for a while. He's in Japan. He's in Puerto Rico. He is truly somebody who he's like a mercenary. He's a guy who is really kind of all over the place.
I didn't. His dad's Native American from the Blackfoot tribe.
Yeah, and no, his mom. I believe his mom is. I think his dad is African American. Oh, I mean,
his mother was African American from Michigan, and his father was a member of the Native American Blackfoot tribe. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
And he was trained by Jack Britton, who was a welterweight boxing guy.
He was also the promoter in Montreal, the father of Gino Brito.
Yeah,
I brought that up earlier when he later would go, I believe, the team with Dino Bravo in the WWF.
Yeah, man, I Abdul's like, if you had suggestions of yes, Abdul the Butcher is still alive to this day. He
is 83 years old. I know when he was doing that Deathmatch Hall of Fame, which was just a few months ago, he was getting around with the aid of one of those assisted scooters, the mobility scooters, but. Again, he's an 83-year-old man who
was 350 pounds, probably,
and also had a pretty hard life. Smoked, living his life on the road. Had fought hepatitis C, so he's had an interesting life.
Some matches you would recommend for Abdul the Butcher?
That is so hard. There's not a lot. He's so unlike like a lot of the classic wrestlers we talk about. Not a lot of what he did. Like it's not like, oh, you can't miss this Abdul the Butcher match. You can't. There's not that, like, he wasn't what you consider a classically good wrestler. He was a character, and he could just kind of brawl all over the place. And a lot of the matches, like if his matches with the Sheik, his matches with Bruiser Brody, if he can find one, great. But a lot of that stuff is kind of lost to time. Like the Detroit library wasn't really out there. the Stampede library. They had it up for a little bit, and then they took it down. There was only a few matches, like their TV. There's not a whole lot of Abdullah you can see. A lot of the stuff you can really find easily from him is his later stuff. His stuff, you can see him wrestle One Man Gang at Heroes of Wrestling.
Yeah.
You can find some of his WCW stuff is out there, but there's not like, oh, you have to go see this Abdullah the Butcher match. It's more about kind of just seeing Abdullah the Butcher. It's more like just seeing him come out, stab somebody.
Looking at Cage Match, he has a couple All Japan Pro Wrestling shows that a lot of people recommend or higher ones, but a lot of them are the same people just booked in different matches, and like they're saying literally 1, 2, 3, 4 matches on this that you should watch are December 15th of 1977, 1978, 1979, 1979, and 1980. Those matches. It's Abdullah the Butcher and the Sheik versus Dory Funk and Terry Funk. They had 4 different matches in All Japan that you should go watch. And then there was Abdullah the Butcher versus Terry Funk in 2 matches in 1980. One a singles match, one a best out of 3 falls match.
Where are people finding these matches is what I'm wondering.
I don't know. I don't know where to watch
are these
that,
easily available? And they might be on YouTube or something like that. But and then at that point, Abdullah's younger, and they're probably wild brawls. I'm guessing they are more kind of matches that would be a prototype of the all over the building crazy brawls that are very commonplace now.
Yeah.
But that to say like, oh, what's a great Abdullah the Butcher match is to not really have an understanding of Abdullah the Butcher.
Yeah. No, totally.
That's not really what he was about.
Mm-hmm. First match you remember watching him?
That WCW run. It might be that goofy Chamber of Horrors match.
Chamber of Horror. For me, it's the one I seen him live in with Terry Funk. I mean, it wasn't filmed. It was in a local school 20 minutes down the road. But when you see a man that looks like him come out and get stabbed in the forehead with a fork, and it's sticking straight out of his head and blood is spraying out as the fans are grabbing their children and running for the exits, it was
that is the Abdullah experience. That is what the hell is this guy?
People were literally in the crowd and they saw everything go down. They saw the whole show. Then that match happens. It starts off, they get in the ring, fork comes out, Terry Funk kicks him in the stomach, takes the fork out of his hands and buries it right into his skull. And the whole place shrieked because when he did it, he let go of the fork and it was still sticking straight out of his head. And he looked around the crowd, and Abdul was very animated with his face. He had great facial expressions. So he's selling to the crowd like, and he's pouring blood. Like it is spraying out of him. And his fork is sticking, and he's looking at the crowd like, and then he just falls out. Boom, lands flat back on his thing, fork sticking out, and just blood going. And people are just running for the doors, like grabbing kids that are bawling their eyes out and just running for the doors. And then they just decided to wrestle all over the building, and there's blood everywhere.
And that is the Abdullah the Butcher experience.
Yeah.
That is more quintessentially Abdullah the Butcher than I'm sure. Look, if those matches are Abdullah and the Sheik against the Funks, they're not exchanging top wrist locks for a long time. I can guarantee you.
I have to find my photos, but I will put, actually they're sitting right here. I don't know how long it would take me to find. If it's not right on top, I'm ending this bit right away, but I will share it on my social media at Anthony Blackwell Jr. on Instagram. I got it. It might be right on top.
You got it?
The one right on top is me and Virgil when I was a kid.
There you go. There's also a, I know one of the interesting things they did in WCW in 1991, they did the Battle Bowl, which was like the Lethal Lottery where they supposedly randomly drew tag teams. And Abdullah the Butcher actually teams with Sting in the first Lethal Lottery in 1991. Abdullah the Butcher and Sting against Bobby Eaton and Brian Pillman, which is an interesting match. There's Funk and Abby. There they go.
And people are losing their mind. You can't see it on Abdul right now, but he's a mess.
And that's what he did. He came in, he would stab people with forks, he would get stabbed with something. It was a style of wrestling that he really helped invent. And maybe it doesn't kind of stand up to today. You couldn't do that in Pennsylvania now. They would you would get your license pulled from you.
I don't think you were able to do it in Pennsylvania then. But Abdul is one of those guys like, I'm leaving tomorrow. I don't care. Like I'll never be back in this.
They would, if you had the right guy there, like a Frank Talent, they would let you get away with a lot back then.
Yeah.
They would let you get away with a lot back then. But yeah, fascinating man, fascinating story. If you just kind of Google like Abdul the Butcher, or you look up on YouTube, there's probably a wild brawl or two out there, where it's just the chaos. He's not a guy. You're not gonna look and see like even especially by the modern standards of quote unquote work rate. You're not really gonna get that from Abdul the Butcher. You're gonna get a and it's not even so much like the modern death match. Like I don't think there's a lot of like light tubes and things like that. They didn't really do that back then. No. I remember there was a thing, I want to say it was in Jersey, where somebody breathed fire on him. I think it was a Buddha Singh who wound up becoming Balls Mahoney. Breathed fire on him. I remember the pictures in the wrestling magazine. It like cooked part of his flesh. Like he had burns on his chest from like you could see like parts where like the skin had burned off because it was like that pinkish skin under his skin.
Yeah. Yikes.
And
he probably loved it too. He's a sicko.
It was money. It was a paycheck. It was a gig. But yeah, so Abdul the Butcher is a very interesting one. It's kind of an outside the box person to cover. Somebody that's a little bit different than, he's a legend for sure, but he's a little bit different than your normal legend. That's why you can't really put it in that box like, oh, well, let's say like again, there's no great Abdul the Butcher promo. He never talked. It wasn't about him having this match that is like a Bryan Danielson match or it was just kind of the spectacle of this crazy gigantic man who was going to stab people and not care if he gets stabbed either.
Yeah.
And after all that,
Philly Mike Swanson beat Mike Skyros for the High Tension World Championship.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the end of Mike Skyros at for High Tension Wrestling. Philly Mike is your new champion.
Interesting.
That just happened.
I know Skyros got a chance to wrestle Minoru Suzuki.
Minoru Suzuki,
well. Yeah.
Super cool. So I'm gonna post on my Instagram right now the Terry Funk photo so everybody could see it. I wonder if there's anybody in the photo that like people like, oh my god, I remember that. Like,
could be, yeah, that's very possible.
Yeah, but all right, man. Let's wrap this one up. BP, next week we'll be back for the King of the Ring 1995. So make sure y'all do your homework for that one, and then we'll be back the week after to do what if King of the Ring 95 was good, and we rebooked the whole show.
Emphasis on work. This is going to be I know I just talked about how much worse Heroes of Wrestling was. Don't get it mixed up. This is a bad show.
Yeah.
You're going to watch some bad wrestling.
But all right. Anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
Yes, if you can follow PPW Entertainment on social media, we're doing a lot of work there. I will be at AXW on this coming Saturday the 20th, also my birthday. Not that really means it matters at all. So I know what they're doing here with this is if you go to, I believe that their YouTube was just AXW, American Excellence Wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
They have a thing called Recharge. So at 5 o'clock, I believe it's 5 o'clock on Saturday, this coming Saturday, they're going to be live on YouTube for about an hour. I will be on the call. I believe I'll be on the call with Cowboy Pete Carter from the Monster Factory, who is a very good broadcast partner to have. And we are going to call 3 live matches leading into the matches, that main show that night, which is going to be on AXW's Patreon. But the matches they put in, I'm going to see some of my PPW buddies there, so I'm pretty happy about that. VSK will be there. VSK is wrestling Bones.
I love Bones. Bones had a really cool match with Twitch last one.
Yes, he did. And now he's no disrespect against Twitch, but VSK is and again, all due respect to Twitch, I think VSK is like a little bit of the deeper end of the pool. He's been in AEW, he's been in TNA, one of the crown jewels of Creative Pro, one of the most well-rounded, complete wrestlers out there today, in my opinion. And it's going to be amazing to call it. I'm actually excited to call a VSK match. I'm very excited about that. And then we have Raheem Royal, who I've seen at PPW a few times. Didn't really. I'm gonna take a bullet here for PPW. Didn't showcase in the best way we could have. But he is going to get showcased here because he's taking on Marcus Mathers. And then another really fun one. And this is something we're going to run back from a PPW show back in May. You were there, as a matter of fact. We're doing AXW is doing GKM and Diego Hill, which I'm very excited for. That's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, so come hang out with us Friday in Philly.
That's right, yeah.
And then
going to the Wrestle Pit.
Once again, I'll be at New Era Pro Wrestling for Summer Ship Meltdown, and I believe get your tickets in there. At the links are on their website, neweraprowrestling.com, or their Facebook pages.
I believe they're going to be crowning a new tag team champion. They're starting to crown a
tag team tournament. I'll be on the call with I think JS Michaels from the 570 Wrestling Experience.
Oh, very cool.
And and then Fightertainment next Thursday at Pilgrim Brewing Company. Come hang out. Just turned 3 years old, that brewery.
And then Fightertainment, and then a few days later, Brewfest.
Brewfest.
So busy couple of weeks here. A lot of wrestling, a lot of fun stuff, a lot of wrestling in bars with no ring. That's not even wrestling. It's no ring. It's fighting. It's fighting.
Yeah,
you stay away at stupid athletic commission. You stay away.
Yeah, stay the hell away, especially you, Travis Norbert. We can't stand you.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. All right. We'll see you guys on the next one. Here's some music by the Converse Kid. We are out of here.